And turn that thing on. So I'm curious though, I do want to ask, what's up with the mic? Because I thought it was supposed to be something in the center of the table.
So the boundary mics were picking up too much grumbling.
Well, they didn't like the lesson or what? Grumbling. I don't know if I like the word
But
grumbling.
it was page flipping and stuff. It was getting too much of that to where it was overpowering.
Okay.
Up there. So that mic points more at you. It will pick up a little bit, but
All right, well, we're off.
You're 90%, we're 10%.
Okay, we're off and good. So I hope that's all the growling that was going on. So we are in lesson 4 today, the death of Christ, and I do believe that we must be running behind a little bit in this series. I'm feeling like looking at the calendar. But wanted to, it starts off, we're talking about debt. And, everybody gets all worried about debt, and the president wants to forgive debt, and everybody's in debt, and nobody's got any money because of debt, and everybody wants to live debt-free. Just turn on Dave Ramsey's, and he'll tell you how to do it. And I looked this up, and I found it a little interesting. This is a spring 2024 book, so it's not old. And it says the average household debt in the United States is $96,371. Well, I asked the AI on Bing yesterday afternoon, which I'm sure is just wonderfully correct, and that number has already risen to $101,915. Inflation, I'm telling you, interest rates are up, inflation, but just in a short time, that average household debt has already gone up. It's at $17.06 trillion. That is not our national debt. That is the debt that Americans owe on various things. And some debt good? What are you going to debt for? What's good debt? House. Car. Car's questionable? Yeah, cars are evil. You need one to get from here to there, and it has to do certain things along the way. But other than that, I got to tell you, they're a money-losing proposition for sure. What would Dave say? When you think about debt, and after going through his series twice, that does come to my mind. If I ever think about borrowing something, what would Dave say? Everybody wants to be free and clear, and that's like the American dream. When we're young, we get a bunch of debt, and then we see what we've done, and we think, man, I got to get out of this debt. And it's not done. There's no magic lottery ticket. We always hear about somebody far, far away in another state that wins a bunch of money, but not a good financial option to get out of debt, that's for sure. But removal of debt happens very, very slowly through a long period of time, making small daily sacrifices, and it takes discipline. But when you come to the debt of sin, that isn't a check that you can write. And we'll tie back into this a little bit toward the end of the lesson, a term that I found somewhat interesting. But we're starting off with that, and you can roll that around a little bit as we go on. But we're going to be in Luke chapter 23 this morning, so we won't be flipping around, just flipping forward once you get there. And we'll be starting off in verse 32. Yes. And I guess, I'm going to be backwards this morning. Camden, would you read verses 32 through 34?
Yeah. And there were also 2 other malefactors led with him to be put to death. And when they were come to the place which is called Calvary, there they crucified him, and the malefactors, one on the right hand and the other on the left. And they said, Jesus, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they parted his raiment and cast lots.
So all of these things are fulfilling scriptures, but note that Christ wasn't crucified alone. There were criminals with him too, one on either side. And the Father forgive them. We are going to get to, we'll come up to that again here in a second, I do believe. But the Father forgive them is more of, I think, the people that are actually putting him up there than the people that he's up there with. But so in Luke, Luke chapter 22, leading up to the chapter that we're in now, into 23, has Jesus standing before the Sanhedrin, which is the ruling council that would have had Pharisees and Sadducees probably would have been on that council, and it was, I think I've read, known to be made up of about 70 men, and they were put him on trial because he claimed to be God, and they wanted him stoned. Now, the Roman government would not allow the Jews to execute somebody. They have the ultimate control unless he had broken some type of Roman law. So that leads us up to chapter 23. And when we open, it's in he's standing before Pilate. And if you flip back and kind of follow along with me here a little bit to the beginning of chapter 23, we will see in verses like 4 through 7 that Christ is standing before Pilate, and Pilate says for the first time in verses 6 and 7, I find no fault with him. So he's standing there, and Pilate hears everything that everybody's got to say, says, I can't find any fault with this guy. He didn't do anything to be worthy of put to death. Now, Pilate finds it out, or at least he thinks he does, because somebody mentions that Christ is from Galilee. And that's kind of outside of his territory a little bit. He finds it out because Herod is ruling in Galilee. He's the guy in charge over there. So, and Herod just happens to be in Jerusalem. So he sends Christ over to Herod. And he thinks that, look, this is my out here. I don't need to have anything to do with this. So Christ goes over and he stands before Herod. And Herod hears all the charges. Herod finds no fault with him and sends him back to Pilate. But when he sends him back, I never really thought about the robe thing. How many people here realized he put a nice robe on him and sent him back? I don't know why. The robe has always been a part of the crucifixion story, but I'll be honest, reading through this, I didn't realize where it came from. Now, Herod had just put John the Baptist to death, and I do believe that was taunting him a little bit. I'm not really sure what he thought about Christ, but he put a robe on him and sent him back to Pilate and said, I find no fault with this guy. And Pilate, again, as we look down through in verses 13 through 15, he offers to release him, saying, secondly. So the first time in verses 1 through 5, a second, then he sends him to Herod. Herod finds no fault with him, sends him back. And then in verses 13 through 15, Pilate's saying again, I find no fault with him. Herod found no fault with him. Then we're going to come back in verses 16 through 19, and they're still wanting this to go forward. And he offers to release him again. 3 times Pilate tried to release him, and 3 times they screamed no. Give us Barabbas, the murderer, instead. I think it had to do with the Passover. They were allowed to waive somebody's punishment, a presidential pardon, if you were, and he offers to pardon this guy. He didn't do anything wrong. Surely you'd want him pardoned, and they screamed no. They didn't want him pardoned. They wanted him crucified. They said, give us the murderer Barabbas, pardon him instead. And Luke does not tell anything as we're moving, we're going to keep moving forward here, and we're going to move back up to verse 32. We got 3 people being crucified. Luke does not tell us anything about the other 2 people except that they were criminals. And people estimate the cross was much heavier than the one we have hanging up front, although the size would be relatively close. It weighed about 200 pounds. So a lot for somebody to carry. But as we look at Calvary, this is something else I've learned in this lesson. In verse number 33 of chapter 23, flip over here, and it came to the place which was called Calvary. Now, there's another name for it too. Anybody got it? Golgotha. They both mean the same thing, 2 different languages. They both mean skull. Okay, I had never caught that. I knew I had been told that Golgotha meant skull. I did not know that Calvary meant the same thing, just 2 different languages. Obviously, the place of crucifixion. It doesn't. The Bible does not point it out, other than it had that name, the skull. It obviously was a place where they must have done the executions on a consistent basis. So we're going to move on to look at the actual time, the crucifixion itself. Now, no one gospel, there's 7 references to Christ's words on the cross, and no one gospel contains all of them. In verse 34, this is where I was coming back to it. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." This appears to be for the people that were acting out of ignorance. There were a lot of people there that did not understand who Christ was, why he was there, and what was going on. And especially the Romans themselves, they were following orders, do what they were told to do. And we also see, to fulfill prophecy, they parted his raiments and cast lots. And I often kind of thought, what would his raiments really be worth? They're casting lots for him. But then Herod gave him that robe.
Makes sense.
Probably out of everything he had, that would have maybe, they wanted to know who got that.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that had some monetary value. I don't picture a lot of people showing up to be crucified having much on them worth anything. I have heard stories of people tipping the executioner back in the day. That sounds odd, but this can go good. This can go bad. I never thought about that until I read, everybody's familiar with Marie Antoinette? No? Yes, you've heard the name?
I know the name.
Okay, Marie Antoinette was married to King Louis of France when the revolution took over. She was the one that was famous for saying, when they came to her and said, "You don't understand, there's nothing to eat, the people have no bread," she said, "Let them eat cake." Just totally disconnected. Or so that was the portrait they wanted to portray. But her last words, as she was being led up to the chopping block, she stepped on the executioner's foot and said, "Excuse me, sir, I did not mean to do that. I'm very sorry." She knew it could go one way, Yeah, it's not a person you want to be rude to, for sure. So, let's move on a little bit. Mike, would you read verses 35 through 37?
And the people stood beholding, and the rulers also with them, behind him, saying, He saved others,
So, here he's up on the cross at this point, and, this is where people are starting to mock him. He's supposed to have all this power. Look at all the things he did. Everybody says he did all this stuff. If you really did all this, you brought people back from the dead, come on down. You know, how's anybody gonna stop you? And people begin to mock him. And as they are, the soldiers are getting in on this, especially. I probably was, obviously there was a lot of animosity between the Romans and the Jews on the Jewish part, but I'm also suspecting that Romans had a very low opinion of the Jewish people and probably took a little bit of joy. You're saying, you know, all these people said, this is your Savior, this is your Messiah you've been waiting for, you know, come on down. To have somebody dying on the cross and obviously very thirsty, and a drink would have been what little comfort you probably could have got. There's not, you know, not much up there that's going to give you comfort, but to get a little bit of water and to give somebody in that state expecting water, vinegar, you know, you talk about rubbing it in. That's rubbing it in. That's not definitely not being kind at all. Let's go on. Would somebody pick up just verse 38?
And a superscription also was written over him in letters of Greek and Latin and Hebrew. This is the King of the Jews.
So, you know, I've thought about this sign, and I thought about putting one up there at Easter, you know, having that sign up, because it was written into 3 languages at the time. So it was in Greek, it was in Hebrew, so it would have been in Hebrew, that was the language of the Jews. We wanted to make sure all the Jews knew what it said. It was in Greek because that was a language, it was like a trade language, that if you didn't speak Hebrew and you happened to be walking by, you were going to get it. And then it was in Latin, the language of the Roman Empire. And I got to tell you, I don't think that the Sanhedrin probably would have thought much of that sign being hung up there. I think this was a dig that Pilate had. He didn't want to crucify this guy. He didn't think he deserved it. And this is what he was being crucified for. And he knew they didn't like it, and he wanted everybody to know. And I've also noted that if you look at the three Gospels, look at Mark in 27:37, and it says the sign said, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." In John 15:26, it says the sign read, "The King of the Jews." And John wrote, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." All 3 signs say the same thing. What the exact wording was, we don't know, but you get the gist of, they all say the same thing. Somebody just picked a little different way to say it, but all 3 signs say the same thing. I had never noticed those differences before, but to me, it's not really a difference. It's how Corey might say it, I might say it, I'm explaining what the sign said. And traveling Bob over here probably would have said it the most eloquently. So,
Was there a part with that where the Jews wanted Pilate to change what he wrote as well? They wanted him to say, "He has said," right? And I always thought that was interesting too, because it's like they didn't want the sign, like you're saying,
yeah,
to show the king. It's he claims.
he claimed he was the king, yes.
Pilate stood on what he put up there, yeah.
Yeah, he did not. I do believe that was a dig from Pilate to the Sanhedrin. He didn't want to crucify him. He put the sign, because I think his answer was, I have written what I have written,
Right.
or something like that. Like, no, I'm not changing it.
Yep.
Yeah, that was, anyway, yeah, if I could spell it in Greek, I probably would have made a sign. So that was verse 38.
Yes.
Could we want, Mark, could you get 39 through 40, 39 and 40?
Then one of the criminals who were hanged blasphemed him, saying, "If you're the Christ, save yourself and us." But the other answering rebuked him, saying, "Do you not even fear God, seeing you are under the same condemnation?"
So this is where the two, now, you know, the two people that were crucified with him, I cannot imagine how I would take having, being put up there. I'm going to say you're going to go through a range of emotions and pain, and one of them is you're going to be ticked. The two people that are being crucified with him, one of them is definitely beginning to mock him. The other Gospels indicate originally they both said something. It doesn't say what. The only actual words that were recorded are these, but they indicate it says it uses plural. It doesn't go into any details, but it's plural, as in they both said something. But there does come this point, at least with one of them, if we could pick up the next couple of verses there, would that be 41 through 43?
And we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds. But this man hath done nothing amiss. And he said unto Jesus, Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom. And Jesus said unto him, Verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be with me in paradise.
So, I think there's been a lot of sermons preached on these couple of verses over the years, because there's a lot there. This guy makes the realization that Christ shouldn't be there. You know, what are you saying this for? Look, we're up here because we deserve it. You did this and I did that, and you know it and I know it. This guy's hanging up here and he didn't do anything. And now, again, in the other Gospels, it makes a plural. Did he say something negative or sarcastic up front when the cross is first being lifted up? I truly, you don't know. That none of that is recorded for us. But this guy, at least at some point of hanging on that cross, comes to the realization of who this guy is. And he looks at him and says, when you get into your Father's kingdom, when you get into the kingdom, remember me. Is that a profession of faith? I'm going to say that it was, because of the result. We like to look at words people say or how eloquently they say it. Christ is going to look at your heart. It doesn't matter what words you have said or you have not said, he is going to know. Nobody's going to be saying, well, you did the right thing, but you didn't word it quite right. If you would have said it like this, boy, you'd be in. He's going to look at your heart and he's going to know. And Christ looked at this man and he knew. And, I could remember a guy telling me one time that you had to be baptized to get to heaven. And, being a good Baptist, I came back with, what about the thief on the cross? You don't know that he wasn't. I didn't know he wasn't. So that is, a story that can get, you can really go down a rabbit trail on those couple of verses. But Christ did have, the gist of it is, Christ had the ultimate authority. And let's pick up the next couple of verses, 43 through 45. If we could. Yeah.
And Jesus said unto him, Verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be with me in paradise. And it was about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour. And the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst.
Okay, so there's quite a few things in here that I find fascinating. One of them is the Passover occurs that it went dark. Okay, so it went dark from those hours. What time of the day would that have been? Because they don't keep time like we keep time. Bob's thinking. I see it
That
rolling
would've been
around.
noon, right? When they had started their time at 6 a.m. So it was the 6th hour. I've got it in my notes.
Yeah, it would have been like noon to 3. So it would have started right about lunchtime, would have been noon to 3 p.m. Okay. Now, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? It went dark in the middle of the day. It just happened here, didn't it? You know, I thought God calls an eclipse, or there was an eclipse that lined up with this. I don't know why, that's always been on my mind. But I had never,
Or after having seen the one here.
well, yeah, but I had never seen an eclipse until the one here. And it did get dark, but how long did it last?
3 minutes.
Yeah, so that ain't 3 hours, okay? And I could not believe in watching it with the slightest sliver of the sun being around the moon through those glasses, how light it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, yeah, I mean, anybody else amazed by that? I kept thinking it would get, but you really didn't notice a huge difference in the darkness around you until it was covered. Just a small sliver of that sun, and it was still really, really light. Yeah, so I'm not the only person that thought, wow, about that. But also, there's another big-time flaw in this. So this is Passover. Okay, that's why they're all in Jerusalem. Okay, Passover always comes when there is a full moon. That they go by, that's why our dates vary, but Passover always occurs during a full moon. And you cannot have a full moon and an eclipse. A solar eclipse, to be. And, they said that in the lesson. Again, I went to Bing, I asked AI. They lined right up with the guy that, I fact-checked it. They lined, AI on Bing lined up right away with the, with the author of the lesson said, yeah, you cannot have an eclipse, a solar eclipse cannot happen with a full moon. So this was not an eclipse. The moon did not go in front of the sun. This was something completely and totally different. The light of the sun failed. The light of the sun failed. Because, yeah, I don't know why, but in the back of my mind, I just always thought when it said it got dark, I thought, that was an eclipse, and they last for a while. But I realized a full eclipse is only a few minutes, but I'd not experiencing one until this. I was really kind of surprised at the effects, and it did make me realize that this was not an eclipse. It doesn't really say what happened. It doesn't say if anything, just the light of the sun failed. It got dark. It was dark for 3 hours. And that I find absolutely fascinating. And that even perhaps that there wasn't a little bit more, how do you want to say, detail given about it. And the next thing that it says that I find a little bit fascinating is the veil in the temple. So does everybody have a concept of where this veil is and how big it is? The veil separates the the Holy from the Holy of Holies, I guess, where the priest was only allowed to go once a year. This is not a curtain like you have hanging up in your house. This thing is huge. And it goes, I've always heard stories about it. I don't want to tell you I comprehend exactly how it was made, but this veil, this curtain, was made from 72 panels of linen, embroidered with twisted threads of purple, blue, and scarlet. The curtain was approximately 60 feet tall, 30 feet wide, and 4 inches thick. And it took 300 priests to manage it, if you were going to hang it up. Yeah, they didn't have cranes, so I don't think there was any kind of automatic. I'm sure there was a pulley or something involved in some ropes and rigging perhaps, but it ripped from top to bottom. And that is something that you, what is the significance of that? No, it's not. But again, this is in the temple. What is in the Holy of Holies? God. That is the seat where God was at over the Ark of the Covenant. That is covenant. That is where God was. And you didn't have access to God. The high priest did once a year. This was ripped in half from top to bottom. Clearly stated in all the Gospels, and the significance of that would be everybody has access to God now. There's no more limited access. It wasn't something the priest could only do once a year. This you would have thought caused quite the stir among the Sanhedrin that just had this guy crucified. That was, to me, an over the top. Anybody that worked in that temple that had any kind of a doubt about who Christ was when he died and that veil was torn from top to bottom, that should have removed all doubt. I don't know what kind of excuse people may have came up with to cover that one, but okay, not doing bad. Let's see, let's go through, what was the last verse we read? Was it 45? 45? 46 through 46, 47, and 48. Could you grab that, Mike?
And when Jesus had cried with a loud voice and said, Father, unto thy hands I commit my spirit. He gave up the ghost. And when the centurion saw that he was found, he glorified God, saying, certainly this was a righteous man. And all the people that came together to that sight, beholding things which were done, smote their breasts and returned.
Yes.
All his approval. God is therefore beholding these things.
Okay, so it is in verse 46. It is recorded here, Father, unto thy hands I commit my spirit. There is in John that it is recorded, he used the term, it is finished. And somebody recently brought this to my attention, Corey, that this is actually what kind of a term?
What did I say?
Financial.
I like that one, yep.
Yeah.
I'm gonna talk about that today too.
So I looked this up in Strong's Concordance, and this is I'm going back to the beginning of the lesson now. What debt's worth, is there debt that's worth going into and getting out of debt, okay? This term used in John, it is finished. This word, finished, is translated finished 8 times. Fulfill 7 times, accomplished 4 times. Are we seeing a trend here? When you start thinking about paying off debt, you paid off your debt. You fulfilled your obligation. You finished paying it off. You made your last. You've accomplished something. It's also used twice. It's translated pay, as in you paid something, and once performed. And there's 2 miscellaneous uses for it. But there's many of these words go back to the debt, the paying off of a debt. It is finished. The debt is paid. This is done. It's accomplished. It's always interesting, the terms we use in English. English has too many words, I think, sometimes to describe too many nuances. But the term here, he's committing his hand unto his spirit, and then it's also, I think, incredibly noteworthy, he gave up the ghost. He had the power to lay down his life, and he had the power to pick it back up. And he did both. The fact that he died, not most other people that were crucified did not die exactly like Christ did. They had to do something to him. Yes, that was not supposed to happen to him. And they broke their legs because
They couldn't support themselves up on the cross, and it caused them to suffocate.
yeah, they couldn't breathe anymore if they broke their legs. So they did thrust a spear up through his lungs, into his heart, and but they did not break his legs. They but that word, that term in John, I really appreciate the way that describes it. It is finished. Now, following his final death, this would have came sometime after 3 p.m. The Passover began at 6 p.m. I have a hard time with the concept, and I always have when it comes to certain things going on, that in the Jewish community, their day begins at 6 o'clock at night. But in that part of the world, I think there's other things in the Muslim faith that begin, there's something that makes the news every year, and it starts at 6 in the evening, Ramadan. I think they look at things over there, run a little bit differently, but the Passover began at 6, so they had to have enough time to get Christ's body in the tomb before the Passover started. The centurion's remarks, certainly this was a righteous man. In Matthew, it says, truly, this was a son of God. I don't know how you would take you're the guy, the centurion. So you're the centurion in charge of the crucifixion, and you've got your crew there with you. I don't know how many of his men were there, but you're in charge of making sure all these things are done properly. And I'm going to say that those guys knew exactly what they were doing, how to do it, and how best to accomplish the task. They were good at their job. I'm going to say that being a centurion, he had been in the army for some time. Death would be nothing new to him. This was not his first go around with the crucifixion. And he just saw a certain chain of events take place that you're the guy in charge of the scene, and you're executing somebody, and you have them up on that cross, and the light, it gets dark. The sun goes away. This doesn't happen. There's no explanation for this. You got this guy dying who claims to be this Messiah, and it gets dark. There's an earthquake. There's things going on that people standing around might think, ooh, that's weird, that's odd. You could have a lot of different opinions. But when you're the guy in charge of doing this, what's your epitaph? And that's a big word too. What's on your tombstone? What do you want to be remembered for? What are you thinking? What do you think Pilate thought? All this stuff going on. He's seen it. He's seen the sun go dark. He felt the earthquake. You know, I read, and I don't know how true that, it was on the internet, it must be true, but I have not asked Bing's AI yet. I need to see if that's true. How many guys have heard of the Southern Cross? Okay, there was a song. I don't remember who did that, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But do you know, it's a star, it's a constellation. Has anybody ever seen it? I have not. The reason it's called the Southern Cross is it's only visible from the Southern Hemisphere. Evidently, I never really thought about this. I'm guessing maybe they don't see the Big Dipper. We don't see the Southern Cross. But it makes sense when you think about it. You wouldn't see the same constellations down there that you see up here. Once you get below the equator, can you see the Northern Star? I don't know. Maybe that's a bucket list to go check it out. Not really sure. But I had read but it's a very famous star constellation. It's in a lot of flags, like New Zealand, I think. There's some countries that actually have the Southern Cross in their flag. It's a very famous constellation, that it was visible from the Middle East until Christ's crucifixion. Now, how true that is or not, I don't know. It could be folklore, but I found that one interesting as well. And the smoting of their breasts. Anybody know what that's about? Remember reading that anywhere else in the Bible? Yeah, they're beating their, yeah. I never put any thought into that one. It is evidently an expression of grief and sadness over one's death. It's an outward display of that. So I didn't do too bad, just maybe 3 minutes early. Any questions? Anybody, anything to add? No?
Just pondering on the centurion, the point you were bringing up there too. I always take the assumption that the earthquake was directly during or following Christ crying out and his death at that point in time, and that has to really add to that of, like, you're sitting there watching this guy, the sun's dark, there's already some crazy things happening, and then he cries out and we have an earthquake.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be 1 to 10 to make you, look, there's a whole there's always, I've brought up multiple times when they went to arrest him. And here's Peter, whips out a sword and cuts this guy's ear off, and Christ says, no, I'll go with him. And he reaches down, he picks up the ear, and he puts it back on. You're the guy there to arrest him. I'd be like, hey, look, dude, if you want to come, that's fine. I mean, I could leave here, say I didn't find you.
Well, and like when they came to arrest him and asked him if he was Jesus, and he said, I'm he, and they all fell.
Yeah.
They were all boomed. I mean, that's like, was that a flag, you think?
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of flags up. But as many as they were, and sometimes because it's, there's nothing in human nature that wants to see a righteous person or a person with no fault bear the sins of a crime. But that's the point of it. You don't like to see it, but this is why he was here. When you look at that picture of him on that hill with those two thieves or whatever they were, the two criminals on either side of him, hanging there on a cross, and you look at it and say, man, that's wrong, that's not right. He didn't do anything to deserve that. He shouldn't be up there. That's all absolutely correct, but yet that's why he came. And because that was fulfilled, you and I have the opportunity of that gift that he laid at our feet of salvation that we wouldn't have had. That's what makes it possible. So it wasn't right. It was wrong. They shouldn't have done it. Some people tried to stop it. At the end of the day, it had to happen. So, Mr. Wolf, would you close in prayer?
Once again, be reminded of the depths took that debt upon yourself, you owed no debt, and yet you Lord, we thank you for that. We ask that you might bless the service to follow, be with the recording, who shares the word. We'll thank you and praise you. We ask it in Jesus' precious